I found her in the living room, barefoot, hugging a duffel bag like a child clinging to a teddy bear. She hadn't called ahead. No warning, no text, no knock on the door, just the soft click of the handle and the unexpected sight of her curled up on my sofa. Her hair was a little messy, her mascara smudged just beneath her lashes, and she looked smaller somehow. Not physically, she was still tall, still held herself like someone who never had to ask for space, but emotionally, like someone who had been cracked open and hadn't yet figured out how to close again. She told me she'd had a fight with her boyfriend and needed a place to stay. I assumed it would be one night, maybe two, just long enough for things to cool down or for pride to wear off. That's how it usually went. She had always been dramatic, always stormed in and out of people's lives with the kind of intensity that left scorched footprints on the floor. But a week passed, then another, and her things started to blend into the house like creeping ivy. Her shoes by the door, her jacket over the back of the kitchen chair, her toothbrush lying parallel to mine on the bathroom sink. She made herself comfortable in a way that didn't feel entirely innocent. At first, it was subtle. She'd leave her coffee mug on the kitchen counter instead of rinsing it. She'd play music while cooking, her playlist vibrating through the walls, filling the house with a rhythm that didn't come from me. She'd throw her legs over the armrest of the couch like she owned it, her foot bouncing in rhythm with whatever she was watching. And though she never said it out loud, I started to feel it, the weight of her presence settling into the walls, claiming corners that hadn't been claimed before. My husband didn't say much about it. He'd shrug when I asked if she'd mentioned moving out, offer a vague, soon, probably, and then go back to whatever screen was in front of him. He never really knew how to say no to her. I think part of him felt responsible, even after all these years apart. After all, she was his little sister, the wild one, the unpredictable one, the one who lived on instinct and fire and whatever direction the wind decided to pull her. I watched the way he interacted with her, distant, a little tired, like someone who tried to build bridges too many times, only to watch them collapse again. And yet, he let her stay. So did I. But my reasons were different. She had a way of moving through the house that felt both invasive and magnetic. She walked barefoot on hardwood floors, toes flexing against the grain like she could sense the history in the wood. She wore tank tops that dipped low on the sides, exposing the smooth curve of her ribs and the shadow beneath her arms. Her shorts rode high on her thighs, and when she leaned over to pick something up, I had to look away. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't know what would happen if I didn't. She used my lotion. She borrowed my robe. She sprayed perfume that wasn't hers and asked if she could keep the guest blanket, even though it had been a gift from my mother. And somehow I let her. I found excuses. She didn't pack enough. She was going through something. She just needed comfort. But comfort had started to look like her standing in front of the refrigerator in nothing but one of my old t-shirts, the fabric brushing the tops of her thighs, her mouth half open as she tried to remember what she came for. I began to notice the way she looked at me, not overtly, not in a way anyone else would catch, but in the seconds that followed a joke or a question, her gaze would linger half a beat too long, just long enough to make me question the space between us. It was like she was watching me in a way no one else did anymore. Not my husband, not my friends. She saw things. The tiredness behind my smile, the way I touched my necklace when I was nervous, the quiet, invisible weight I carried in my shoulders, and I began to watch her back. When she danced around the kitchen to music only she could hear, hips swaying, arms loose and joyful, I felt something stir in my stomach that had no name. When she came back from the shower, wrapped in a towel, her skin flushed and damp, her hair twisted on top of her head like a crown, I had to grip the counter to keep myself steady. I told myself it was admiration, that it was envy, that it was the kind of thing any woman might feel toward another woman who lives without apology. But deep down, I knew I was lying. There was a night I couldn't sleep. I got up for water and found her asleep on the couch, the blanket tangled around her legs, her tank top riding up to reveal a strip of soft belly. She looked peaceful in a way that made my chest ache. I stood there for too long, watching her breathe, the rise and fall of her chest almost hypnotic. I didn't touch her. I didn't say a word. But something in me shifted that night, something that wouldn't shift back. I started to dread the sound of her suitcase zipper, not because I wanted her to leave, but because I know what it would mean if she stayed. She had already begun to change the air in the house, the way light fell on the walls, the rhythm of my mornings. I woke up thinking about her laugh. I went to bed remembering the smell of her hair when she passed behind me in the hallway. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was something else, something blooming and dangerous and warm, and I couldn't stop myself from letting it grow. With my husband gone on a business trip, the house took on a new rhythm. There were no footsteps upstairs at 6 in the morning, no keys dropped in the bowl by the front door, no TV buzzing from the bedroom late at night. His absence should have made the space feel quieter, emptier, easier to breathe in, but instead, it felt more alive. She was still here, moving through the rooms like a warm current, like something let in through an open window and never asked to leave. The house didn't feel abandoned, it felt awakened. She started making breakfast in her underwear, not lingerie or anything obviously meant to provoke, just simple cotton, white tank tops, soft boy shorts, loose drawstring shorts hanging low on her hips. She didn't ask if I minded. She didn't explain. She just moved around the kitchen like it belonged to her, humming low, reaching for the top shelf on her tiptoes, arching her back slightly as she stretched. I would sit at the table pretending to read the news on my phone, but the words blurred into nothing the moment she turned toward the stove. The unspoken boundaries began to dissolve. Doors stayed open. Bathroom visits were no longer veiled behind locked knobs and hurried flushes. She'd brush her teeth while I showered, standing at the mirror in just a towel, casually drying her hair or examining her face, as if my nakedness behind the glass curtain was irrelevant. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe she knew exactly what it was doing to me. I couldn't be sure anymore. What I did know was that I stopped reaching for my robe. I moved slower when I knew she was near. My skin became a language I had never spoken before, and suddenly it was desperate to be read. We started sharing space in a way that felt intimate without touching. Her books appeared on the coffee table beside mine. Her phone charger was permanently plugged into the outlet next to my side of the bed. She stole sips from my water glass, wore my hoodie around the house, curled up on my side of the couch when she watched TV. Everything she did was ordinary, but layered with something untraceable and charged. There was no pretense of separation. And still, we hadn't touched. Not deliberately. Not yet. Nights became harder. I would lie in bed and listen for her footsteps in the hallway, the sound of the bathroom door closing, the soft splash of water in the sink. My imagination ran wild in those moments. I pictured her pausing outside my door, wondering if I was awake, wondering if I would welcome her in. I wondered if I would say yes. My breath would catch just thinking about it. And then silence. The house would fall quiet again, and I would be left with only the memory of her body passing close to mine that day, her hip brushing my back as she reached for a plate, her fingers grazing my forearm when she handed me a mug. One evening, we ended up on the couch, side by side, legs tucked beneath us, a blanket thrown lazily across our laps. We watched a movie neither of us cared about. The screen flickered in the dark room, but I didn't look at it. I looked at her, at the curve of her jawline, the line where her thigh met the hem of her shorts, the soft rise and fall of her chest beneath her t-shirt. She laughed at something on screen and her knee nudged mine, a casual contact that sent a ripple through me. I didn't move away. I leaned into it, just slightly, just enough to pretend it was still an accident. That night, I stood at my bedroom mirror in my nightgown and stared at myself longer than usual. My skin looked flushed, my collarbone more prominent than I remembered, my eyes slightly glassy. I ran lotion over my arms, over my chest, and thought about how her hands might feel doing the same. I imagined her standing behind me, her breath on my neck, her fingers grazing the same skin I now touched. My body responded with an ache that settled low in my stomach. It wasn't just desire, it was anticipation, a waiting, a quiet agreement with myself that something was shifting. I began to notice her looking at me too, not in overt ways, but in glances that held a little longer, in the way her gaze dropped to my mouth when I laughed, or the way she followed me with her eyes when I walked across the room. We still hadn't spoken about anything that mattered, not about her boyfriend, not about what it meant that she hadn't left yet, not about the way we had begun orbiting each other like stars drawn into the same gravity. But the silence between us grew heavier with meaning. It became a pulse we both felt but refused to name. At dinner one night, she reached for the pepper and her fingers brushed mine. I didn't pull away, neither did she. The contact was brief, almost imperceptible, but it left me breathless. I looked at her across the table and something passed between us, something wordless, something old and familiar and entirely new. I looked away, heart thudding in my ears, and knew that from this point on, there was no going back to normal. Later, I passed by her room and saw the door open. She was inside, on the bed, scrolling through her phone with her legs crossed and bare. The light from her lamp cast a golden glow across her skin. She looked up for a second, and our eyes met. I kept walking, too afraid of what I might do if I stopped, but I felt her gaze follow me, warm and unwavering, like a rope tugging gently at the center of my chest. I spent the rest of the night wrapped in that look, unable to escape it. I wasn't sure what she wanted, but I knew what I was beginning to want, and it terrified me how easy it had become to imagine her, not as a guest, not even as my sister-in-law, but as something else entirely, something I had never allowed myself to want before, but now couldn't stop craving. The house had no closed doors anymore, and neither did I. The night unfolded with an unsettling softness, like a curtain being drawn too slowly to notice until the room was already dark. I couldn't sleep. The bed felt too large, too empty, too quiet. I wandered the hallway barefoot, guided only by the low hum of the air conditioner and the distant rhythm of her music coming from behind her door. It was cracked open, just a sliver, just enough to see the flicker of warm light and the outline of her body moving beneath the sheets. My breath caught without permission. Something pulled at me, not curiosity, not concern, but something more intimate, more dangerous. I didn't knock. I stepped inside as if I had every right, as if this were just another moment between us that would pass unspoken. She was lying on her side, facing away from the door, the thin strap of her tank top falling off one shoulder. Her bare back was smooth and curved, glowing faintly in the lamplight. The sheet tangled around her hips revealed the soft dip of her waist. My eyes traveled across the familiar unfamiliarity of her silhouette, and I felt something shift inside me. A release, a surrender, a terrifying kind of calm. I sat down at the edge of the bed without thinking. The mattress dipped slightly under my weight, and she turned her head just enough to glance back at me. Her expression didn't change. No questions, no hesitation, only a quiet acknowledgement of what was already understood. My hand moved before I could stop it, reaching to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. Her skin was warm, slightly damp, fragrant with something floral and faintly sweet. When I touched her, she didn't flinch. She leaned into it, as if waiting. There was no ceremony, no grand gesture, only breath and skin and the unbearable silence between two people who have run out of reasons to pretend. I slipped under the covers beside her, drawn by gravity that had no name. Our bodies didn't collide, they merged. Her fingers found my wrist first, then traced up my arm with a tenderness that made my eyes sting. I pressed my forehead to hers, not knowing what I was about to become, only knowing I couldn't stay who I had been. Her lips found my shoulder, soft, slow, reverent. I exhaled with a sound I didn't recognize. She kissed her way upward, pausing at the hollow of my throat, letting her breath warm my skin before moving on. I reached for the hem of her shirt and pulled it over her head in one motion, my hands shaking slightly as I did. She raised her arms to help, her eyes never leaving mine. Her bare chest rose and fell in shallow waves, and I was flooded with awe, with need, with fear. I cupped her breast and felt her heartbeat against my palm. We didn't rush. We moved like a ritual, like a prayer whispered between bodies instead of lips. Her mouth found mine at last, and I felt my entire body give way. Her kiss wasn't soft, it was certain. She kissed like someone who had been waiting far too long. Our tongues met with a slow urgency, a rhythm that matched the throb building low in my abdomen. I tasted her, and something of myself, something I didn't know had been hiding behind the years of restraint and silence and marital routine. I pulled her closer, one hand sliding down her spine to the curve of her lower back. She straddled me, knees on either side of my hips, her weight pressing into me in the most perfect, grounding way. I moaned into her mouth as her fingers slipped beneath the waistband of my shorts. She pushed them down with a practiced ease, dragging them along my thighs until I was bare beneath her. Her fingers brushed between my legs, testing, learning. My hips rose instinctively, aching for more. She slid down my body, kissing a trail from my neck to my belly, pausing just long enough to make me tremble. Her tongue traced circles around my navel before she moved lower. When her mouth finally touched me there, I nearly sobbed. The sensation was too much and not enough. Her tongue moved slowly, confidently, coaxing waves of pleasure from places I hadn't felt awake in years. I gripped the sheets, arching into her, gasping with every flick, every pause, every slow press of her lips. My climax built gradually, like a storm forming over warm water. I tried to hold it back, afraid of how loud it might be, how deeply it might break me. But she didn't stop. She held my thighs apart and buried herself in me like she belonged there. When I came, I cried out her name into the air, into the ceiling, into her hair, into whatever space still existed between us. And then there was none. My body convulsed, shuddered, then stilled, sinking into the mattress like water being absorbed into soil. She returned to me slowly, kissing her way back up, resting her head on my chest, wrapping herself around me like a second skin. I held her, breathless, wordless, stunned by the intensity of what we had just shared. My hand found her cheek, then her lips, brushing lightly as if confirming this had actually happened. She closed her eyes and nuzzled against my neck, her breath evening out. I felt the steady beat of her heart through my ribs. We stayed that way for a long time, tangled in sweat and silence, our bodies still humming with the echo of what had passed between us. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to think. I just wanted to feel the weight of her, the realness of her, the truth of what we had finally done. There was no shame, there was only awe, and a kind of quiet terror that came from knowing nothing would ever be the same again. When I finally opened my eyes, the lamp was still on, casting gold across her back. My fingers drifted lazily along her spine, memorizing her in the only way I knew how. She stirred slightly, adjusting herself against me, and I kissed the top of her head. I didn't know what to call this. I didn't know what it meant for tomorrow. All I knew was that I had never felt more alive, more desired, more exposed. It was something beyond language, something deeper than words could ever carry. It was a feeling I couldn't name, and yet I knew I would carry it with me forever. I woke before the sun, as if my body knew it had crossed into unfamiliar territory and no longer trusted sleep. The air in the room was heavy with warmth, the kind that lingers after skin has touched skin for too long. The sheets were tangled around my legs, damp with sweat and memory. Her scent still clung to the pillow beside mine, a soft blend of lavender and something deeper, something purely her. I lay still, eyes open, staring at the faint line of light seeping through the blinds, listening to her steady breathing beside me. She slept peacefully, sprawled across the bed, with one arm draped over her stomach and the other resting between us. The sheet had slipped down her back, revealing the curve of her spine, the dip above her hips. Her skin looked golden in the early light, impossibly smooth, impossibly close. I traced her shape with my eyes, not daring to move. My body ached with the weight of what had happened, but it was a quiet ache, the kind that holds equal parts longing and disbelief. Everything felt too fragile to touch. The silence in the room was thick with meaning, like it could shatter with a single word. I could still feel the echo of her hands on me, the way her fingers had memorized my body like it was a map she'd always known. My chest tightened as I remembered the sound she made when I kissed the inside of her thigh, how her hips had lifted toward me like instinct. Those memories pulsed through me now, alive beneath the surface, too vivid to ignore. I wanted to stay in that bed forever, in that half-lit space where nothing had to be named. But my thoughts were already spinning, tangled in fear and desire and shame that hadn't taken full shape yet. My husband's face flickered through my mind, then vanished just as quickly. He didn't belong here, not in this moment, not in this room, not between us. And yet, I felt his presence like a shadow behind every breath. I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, feet finding the cool floor like a child sneaking out of trouble. My robe hung over the chair, and I wrapped it around myself, suddenly aware of how bare I was. The hallway felt longer than usual, the silence louder. I moved through the house like a ghost, the kitchen light too bright, the coffee pot too loud. Every movement felt deliberate, guilty, exposed. I poured myself a cup and stood by the window, staring out at the morning fog. My reflection in the glass didn't look like me. There was a softness around the eyes, a flush in the cheeks, a tremor in the mouth. I brought the cup to my lips and took a sip, hoping the heat would ground me. But it only reminded me of her tongue, the way she had kissed me like she was starving. My body remembered everything in cruel detail, the way she moaned against my skin, the way I lost myself in the taste of her, the way I never wanted it to stop. I heard her footsteps before I saw her, bare, slow, unhurried. She stepped into the kitchen wearing only the oversized t-shirt I had left on the nightstand. Her hair was a mess, her eyes still soft with sleep. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Our eyes met, and something passed between us, something both tender and terrifying. I looked away first, unable to hold it, afraid of what she might see in me. We moved around each other like dancers who had forgotten the choreography. I handed her a mug. She took it with fingers that brushed mine just a second too long. The silence between us was not empty. It was full of the night before, of the way I cried out her name, of the way she held me afterward like she never wanted to let go. But none of it was spoken. None of it was acknowledged. She leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon through the window. I stood beside her, hands wrapped around my mug, heart thudding like a secret I couldn't unfeel. The kitchen, the house, the world, it all looked the same, but nothing was. Every inch of me felt different, touched, opened, rearranged. I wanted to say something, anything, to name what had happened, to ask her if she felt it too, but my throat refused to cooperate. The words stayed locked behind my teeth, trembling with weight. Instead, I listened to the clink of her spoon in the mug, the distant hum of a lawnmower starting up outside, the sound of a life pretending to be normal. She didn't linger. She placed her cup in the sink and turned to leave. As she passed by me, her hand grazed my waist. A simple touch, brief, but it lingered long after she walked away. I stood there long after she was gone, eyes fixed on the spot where she had been, trying to steady my breath. There was no going back to before, not for me, maybe not for her either, but there was no path forward I could see yet, only a strange, aching stillness where certainty used to be. I wanted to follow her, to crawl back into that bed and let her arms erase the questions. But I stayed frozen, bound by fear, by shame, by a love I wasn't ready to understand. The morning light kept creeping across the floor, undisturbed. The world moved forward as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something irreversible had taken root, something soft and burning and entirely unspeakable. The night didn't ask for permission. It returned as it always did, quiet, inevitable, pulling shadows across the floor like a blanket we both pretended not to need. The house had fallen into a strange rhythm of pretense by day and charged stillness by night. We moved around each other with a kind of careful grace, but every step, every glance, every breath felt soaked with the memory of what had already been done. I could still feel her against me, even when we weren't touching. I could feel her in the places she hadn't kissed yet. She came into my room without knocking. There was no need to explain it. The door was barely closed before she reached for me, and I fell into her touch like it was a language we had always spoken. Her fingers slid beneath the strap of my nightgown, pushing it down with a kind of reverence that made me shiver. She moved slowly, like she wanted to memorize me again, not just with her hands, but with her breath, her eyes, her silence. I stood there while she undressed me piece by piece, not from shame, but from something closer to surrender. When we reached the bed, she pushed me back gently, her weight sinking into me like a warm tide. I arched against her instinctively, needing the pressure, needing her. Her lips moved along my collarbone, tracing each bone like it mattered. I buried my fingers in her hair and held her there, not from desperation, but from the unbearable need to feel grounded inside something that felt more real than anything else in my life. Her mouth was warm, her breath soft, her tongue slow and deliberate. My whole body became an ache that only she seemed to know how to answer. She didn't speak, but her hands were fluent. They explored my thighs, the curve of my waist, the underside of my breast, and each point of contact lit a fire in me. I felt her reach between my legs, her fingers gliding with ease, with familiarity. She knew exactly where to touch, how to press, when to pause. My hips lifted into her palm without thought, without control. She drew circles over me with infinite patience, teasing release from me with every breath she stole from my mouth. I came undone quietly, holding my breath until I couldn't, my legs trembling around her wrist, my nails pressing into her shoulder as my body pulsed around her. When I opened my eyes, she was still there, forehead resting against mine, her breathing heavy, her hand still curled between my thighs. I kissed her then, slowly, deeply, tasting myself on her lips. I reached down and slid my fingers beneath her shirt, pulling it over her head in one motion. Her skin felt like heat and silk and memory. I pushed her onto her back and watched her eyes soften as I straddled her. Her hands found my waist, and she held me there, letting me guide us, letting me take from her what I had been craving in silence. I kissed down her chest, my tongue tracing the line between her breasts, circling the peaks until she gasped. I wanted to make her feel what she made me feel, unseen, unbound, overflowing. When I slipped my hand between her legs, she was already wet, already open, already waiting. She moaned into the dark as I slid 2 fingers inside her, her hips meeting mine in a rhythm that felt ancient. I watched her unravel beneath me, her eyes fluttering closed, her mouth open, her hands gripping the sheets as if she could anchor herself through me. She cried out when she came, soft and breathless, her body arching beneath mine like a wave reaching shore. I held her through it, never breaking rhythm, never pulling away until her legs stopped shaking and her breath slowed. I collapsed beside her, both of us covered in sweat and something more sacred. Our arms tangled together, skin on skin, hearts drumming in unison. We lay there in silence, the air between us too full to fill with words. Her fingers found mine under the sheets, lacing through them with a quiet certainty. She brought my hand to her lips and kissed my knuckles, one by one. There was something in that gesture that almost broke me, something too tender, too meaningful, too irreversible. I pressed her hand against my chest and closed my eyes, as if that would make it easier to breathe. Later, I watched her sleep, the curve of her back rising and falling with each breath. I couldn't look away. My fingers hovered above her spine, not touching, just tracing the shape of her in the air. I wanted to carve this moment into memory, to hold it somewhere deep and secret. I wanted to believe that we could stay here forever, inside this room, inside this night, inside the skin we had found refuge in. But morning was already pulling at the edges, a warning, a whisper, a thread unraveling. I closed my eyes and wrapped myself around her, promising nothing out loud, only in the way my fingertips moved across her stomach, slow and careful, like each inch mattered. In that moment, it did. It mattered more than anything else I had ever known. The world outside might still expect something else from me, might still call me wife, might still label her sister. But here, in the dark, with her body wrapped in mine, I was something else, and I wasn't ready to give it up. We didn't need to speak to make promises. We made them in touch, in breath, in the space between heartbeats. We made them at the tips of fingers. Morning arrived with a pale indifference, bleeding slowly through the blinds, settling over the room like a secret we had no right to keep. The air was still warm from the night before, thick with the smell of skin and breath and something sweet that clung to the sheets. I woke to the sound of her breathing, steady and close, her body curved into mine like we'd always fit this way. Her thigh rested over mine, her hand curled near her own chest, fingers twitching lightly in sleep. I didn't move. I was afraid if I did, the moment would dissolve into something less real. I lay there for a long time, letting my mind drift over every part of her I could remember. the slope of her collarbone, the soft space behind her knee, the taste of her mouth still lingering faintly on my tongue. My own body felt foreign, tender, bruised in places that couldn't be seen, marked by sensations that had no language. I tried to slow my thoughts, but they raced in quiet circles. What we'd done, what it meant, what it would mean if I let myself want it again. I closed my eyes and imagined waking up like this every day, but the thought made my stomach twist, not with fear, but with hunger. When she stirred beside me, I pretended to be asleep. Her movements were slow, careful, like she didn't want to wake me. She untangled herself gently, sat on the edge of the bed, and exhaled in a way that told me she was already somewhere else. I watched through barely parted lashes as she stood, pulling on her shirt, smoothing her hair back with both hands. Her posture was quiet, thoughtful, but not regretful. She looked at the window, at the soft morning outside, and then turned toward the door without a glance back. The door clicked softly behind her. I waited until her footsteps faded, then sat up. The sheets were still warm where she had been, and I touched the spot instinctively, pressing my palm into it as if that could hold her there a little longer. I reached for my robe, but didn't put it on. My skin felt raw, exposed, unwilling to be covered just yet. I walked barefoot to the bathroom, washed my face slowly, watching the water drip down my chin. In the mirror, I didn't recognize myself, but not because I was changed, because I was more honest. I looked like someone who had been kissed where no one else had dared to kiss her. The day unfolded like nothing had happened. Breakfast was made, dishes were washed. She moved around the house as if the night had been a dream neither of us wanted to wake from. My husband called to say his flight had landed, his voice familiar and hollow. I answered like nothing had shifted. I smiled into the phone, like my lips weren't still swollen from her teeth, like I hadn't moaned into her shoulder hours earlier. I played the role I had always played, and hated myself a little for how easy it still came. That afternoon, I found her hoodie draped over the back of the living room chair. I picked it up, brought it to my face, and breathed in deeply. It smelled like her shampoo, like sleep, like something I could never admit out loud. I held it for longer than I should have, then folded it slowly and placed it in the laundry basket. Every movement felt like a goodbye I wasn't ready to say, but I said it anyway, quietly, with each small act of erasure. Later that evening, we crossed paths in the hallway. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief second, I saw it, the memory flickering behind her expression, the ache mirrored in the silence between us. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but didn't. I passed her without touching, without breathing, and disappeared into my room like a coward. I sat on the bed in the same spot where she had kissed me, touched me, broken me open. I ran my fingers across my own lips, trying to remember the exact shape of her last kiss. I told myself it was over, that it was just a moment, a mistake, a need that rose and passed like a storm. But even as I rehearsed that lie, my mouth betrayed me, tingling with the gust of her. I licked my lips and still tasted her name there. It wasn't over, not really. It had burrowed inside me, deep and quiet, waiting for the next silence to bloom. When my husband returned, the house shifted again. His voice filled the rooms, his shoes returned to their place, his arm slid around my waist at dinner like nothing had changed. I nodded in all the right places, laughed when I was supposed to, made love with the lights off and my eyes closed. But every time he kissed me, I felt the difference. I knew what was missing. I knew what she had given me with her fingers, with her mouth, with the weight of her body pressed to mine in the dark. She left 2 days later. No explanation. just said she had found a new apartment and packed quietly. She hugged my husband at the door, and when she turned to me, her eyes didn't ask anything. They only held mine for one long, breathless second. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Just that look, that final touch of silence passed from her gaze into mine, and then she was gone. I stood there long after the door closed, fingers touching the spot where she had brushed against me on the way out. My husband chatted in the kitchen, calling my name, asking about dinner. I answered him with the same voice I'd always used, but inside, I was somewhere else, in a room without time, in a bed still warm, in a kiss that never left. Some things don't vanish. They remain. They cling to your skin, your breath, your mouth. Some things stay long after the door has closed, haunting the edges of mirrors, the corners of rooms, the pauses in conversation. What was left on my lips that night never faded. It wasn't love. It wasn't betrayal. It was something else, something I never got to name.